Electronic Frontier Foundation, if you know them, they are a very credible organization when they talk about your internet freedom. I don't know if you follow them, Eric, but the Earn It Act is truly a frightening act, and it's being pushed by some of our favorite people, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. Uh, yeah, Republican of South Carolina,
Hey,
Democrat of
by
Connecticut.
the way, I did see that Lindsey Graham tested negative for corona, and I did like that post in the name of Liberty Starship. I did do that on our account. I did like it.
Well,
So I do
yeah,
not
that was.
wish corona on anybody. I do not wish corona on anybody.
All joking aside, there's a lot of concern right now about Washington. The president was near some corona positive people, and I guess he tested negative as well. So, um, so far it seems to be contained in Washington D.C. As
Oh,
far
but I forgot to mention this, but this is relevant. My congressman, Congressman Schweiker, his office is closed because one of his staff
Mm,
members tested positive.
I heard. So this bill, though, is not about corona. It is about freedom of speech. Now, do you recall the whole debate with Josh Hawley and Section 230 of the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act?
I,
Basically, if you okay, what's that?
no, go ahead, Peter.
Okay, so Section 2 is what protects you if you own a website like Facebook or Google, or it could be any. If you own, say, or something where people produce their own content, right? If you're on Twitter, Periscope, you're responsible for what people post on your website because you don't censor it. There's nobody at Facebook who's watching what you post on Facebook before you post it. Maybe gauge at your post. They don't have enough staff at each and everything. You can't watch each and every video. It's just not possible. So Section 230 protects publishers by saying it's not like in the old days when you published a newspaper in the paper printing days. Now hardly anybody reads a paper newspaper. In the paper newspaper days, um, everything that was in that newspaper was read by the editor, hopefully, and you're not going to see something that protected illegal content. Can have Facebook. You can Facebook and before no it's already out there. It's Pandora's boxes have been opened. So Section 30 protects Facebook, it protects Google, it protects forwarding allows you to publish your own articles. Blogger.com, Twitter, many Instagram, Snapchat, they're all protected by Section 230. But with the Act says you have to earn that protection. How do you earn that protection? Well, I'm glad you asked. You have to follow certain guidelines. They're just guidelines. You're not required to do it, but if you follow you lose your protection. And so these things like not too much encryption. And I thought, well, it sounded the way this was, and I read this article on the EFF, and you can see it looks kind of alarmist. It's in black, and this looks kind of like a George Orwell style eagle there, where he's breaking the key, he's breaking the microphone, representing that they're breaking encryption, they're breaking freedom of speech. It seemed a bit over the top, but then I started to look at other sources, and everybody seems to be in agreement of exactly what it is. IT world, the same thing. Attorney General Barr wants to use this. The carrot is you get to use Section 230, and the stick is it's taken away if you don't weaken encryption. So if you own a service like WhatsApp, for example, that's supposed to be end-to-end encryption, or you have Telegram, or there's a lot of communication apps right now that are supposed to be secure. Now think about this in the context of China. Imagine if China does do this. They don't want you to have illegal apps, right? Yeah, in the Uyghur part of the country, in Xinjiang, I believe is the name of the far western province of China where you have all the Uyghurs. The police are stopping people on the street to make sure they don't have illegal apps on their phone. And these apps are apps that encrypt communications. They want people to be able to communicate freely, privately, one to another. And so, what you have to ask, what kind of um, what kind of company is going to want to give up 30 protection? Because if you have a secret communication, somebody, let's say you have two terrorists talking to each other, right, or two criminals talking to each other, or somebody is spreading child pornography, or as they put it, child sexual abuse material is specifically what they mention. Well, they take away your Section 230 protection, so you're now responsible for people communicating bad things over your network. Now imagine if we could sue AT&T if two criminals called each other on the phone. That's how crazy this is. Absolutely insane. Um, I don't think
I assume this is being done under the guise of this. We need this to fight terrorism. Is
right.
that the angle that we're taking here?
Yeah, terrorism is part of the primary thing they're using is child exploitation, and that's how these things work. Is
Oh, so we're
they
talking about human trafficking, things like that.
yeah, human trafficking. They said, like I said, child sexual abuse material. So I suppose that includes child pornography as well. It's not exactly clear to me what what is covered, but it's broad enough that it could cover, yes, terrorism, and that's primarily what the goal is here. They don't want terrorists or other people who are not friendly to the government, I suppose, able to communicate secretly. Now, recall the Trump campaign had their lines tapped during the election. Technically, it wasn't a tap, right? They didn't physical bug. They listened in on their conversations, use a physical wiretap. So that's somehow an important distinction. If through all of our devices are going to be tapped by the government. And let me tell you, if they're tapped by the government, they're going to be tapped by cyber criminals because encryption works if it works for how encryption works. There's no such secret backdoor. You put backdoors to software, backdoors into websites. Everything you say is now open to the. And we saw with the Vault 7, WikiLeaks revealed something called Vault 7 a couple of years ago. And it was a list of exploits the NSA had discovered. And basically what they found was the NSA had found all kinds of exploits to get into your iPhone, to get into your iPhone, to get into your computer, to get into anything they want to get in. But this goes a step further because it says if there's something that they can't get into, well, they're going to go in with the force of law. They're going to use this carrot and stick approach. They're going to say you only have freedom of speech. You only have the ability to run your website, to run your business free of prosecution for other people's actions if you play ball, if you let the government in to read all of your customers' data. And that's really, to me, that's terrifying. We were going to talk about FISA reform, and that's kind of related. The FISA bill did pass the House. It'll be going to the Senate, and it's the same thing. That your business records, that's called, you may have heard of the third-party doctrine, which is that the government can get records from, say, AT&T to see what you were doing. That's still allowed under the current draft of the law for the so-called FISA reform. But that's exactly what happened to Trump. And Senators Mike Lee and Rand Paul have been talking to President Trump saying he should veto this bill because it is dangerous. It's exactly what was done to him by the so-called deep state. Whether or not you like that word, you had people in the government who didn't like Donald Trump, who were spying on his campaign. They claimed it was for a good reason. They claimed it had to do with law enforcement. But if they did it for a good reason, without permission, they could do it for a bad reason. Okay? And we don't have to sit here and argue and prove that their reasons were bad. The fact is, if you can do it for a good reason, you can do it for a bad reason. If you can do it to bad people, you can do it to good people. It will happen. They start with the bad people. They start going after the so-called child abusers, which this law claims to be against. Now, look, if there are people who are trafficking children. Should your website cooperate with the government? Absolutely. Absolutely. And generally speaking, people are happy to do so. Facebook isn't going to deny a federal subpoena. They're not going to just shove to the side. If the federal government asks for assistance to do for an investigation, they will get that assistance from Facebook. Okay, they will get it from Google.
I think that's a really good point. The fact of the matter is, if you do have a warrant, these companies are going to have to comply, and if they don't, there will be consequences to their failure to comply. They'll be in violation of the law, and people will be arrested or should be arrested at that point. You know what I mean? You can't not comply with a warrant. That's just not an option. You don't have that right. Once a warrant is issued, you have to comply with it. And if they're not going to comply, they're not going to give the information, then the remedy is already there. But I want to back up, because Section 230 is something that's relevant for anybody, any content creator, anybody that's on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, anything. But it's been a huge issue on YouTube. It's been a huge issue on YouTube. I do a pop culture show in addition to this show, and on my pop culture show, we've been talking about COPPA and Section 230 for quite a bit. The funny thing is, there was a whole huge thing about COPPA on YouTube, and for weeks, months, everybody. I remember the Lego builder community was really concerned, really scared of COPPA and the regulations that YouTube was doing. As you may or may not be aware, you have to, when you set up a YouTube now, you have to declare whether this is child content or not. And if you're child content, you have all sorts of restrictions. You lose your ability to have comments on your page. You can no longer do notifications for your page. You lose all sorts of restrictions, and you lose the targeted ads, which is the heart of COPPA, is the targeted ads, and Google's violation of COPPA, because they were targeting ads at people they knew were minors. They knew were under the age of 13. COPPA applies to people only under the age of 13. So I've talked extensively about this actually on my pop culture show. But the interesting thing is, I'm one of the few people that was talking about Section 230. And people don't talk about Section 230 all that much. And Section 230 is very interesting, and very, very interesting. And Section 230, in my opinion, is being abused by many of the large big tech companies, including Google. I think what they did to content creators with making you decide whether you're child content and putting it on you, and basically the FCC saying, hey, if you as a content creator violate the rules, we're going to fine you up to $40,000. And I think that was very heavy-handed, and I think it's wrong, because the violation came from Google, not from content creators. You and me as a content creator, we have a YouTube channel. You and I cannot determine what kind of ads they put on our channel. We don't have that ability. We do not have that ability. We do not decide, unless you and I decide to have an in-show sponsor where we say, Liberty Starship is brought to you by blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Or we do some sort of product placement, or something like that. But you and I do not control. But that's not a targeted ad either. That's a dumb ad. Right. That's not a targeted ad. If we do something like that, that's not a targeted ad. Only Google has the ability to target ads on their platform. So I have a lot of mixed emotions when it comes to Section 230, because I do feel the companies are abusing the intent of 230, and in fact, actually curtailing free speech, when Section 230 is actually supposed to help free speech. Because the distinction between being a publisher and a platform is very significant when it comes to, specifically when it comes to civil law and you being sued for content that you're putting out. So, for instance, I was talking to you about Dr. Campbell earlier. If Dr. Campbell gives some quote-unquote bad medical advice, or medical advice that is beyond his level, because he's a nurse, he's not a doctor, he's not an MD. He is a doctor, but he's a doctor nurse and a PhD. If he goes on YouTube and gives bad medical advice, he can be sued for that. Section 230 is supposed to protect YouTube so they don't get sued, right? But what happens is YouTube might go ahead and say, for instance, well, we don't like this guy giving free advice. Let's just get rid of him because we have people that are doing it for pay and we don't want them to be around. He's competing with them. So let's just get rid of him. And I think, unfortunately, that's what's happening sometimes with Section 230. So I have mixed emotions when it comes to Section 230. And I think we could actually do an entire show just on Section 230.
Sure, we absolutely could. I wanted to share this other article from Wired magazine. You know, Wired has a reputation for being a left of center publication these days. It's more progressive. They pointed out that this is a bipartisan effort. Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, they're going after encryption. And just like the FISA vote earlier today, when you had some Democrats, civil libertarians like Zoe Lofgren supporting real reform, you have both Democrats and Republicans supporting this terrible bill, and it is about encryption. Now let's talk about how encryption actually works. I think a lot of people don't really know how encryption works in the real world. For encryption to be effective, I have to have the key, right? If you want to send me something, you use my public key, you send it to me, so you encrypt it, and I decrypt it, but I'm the only person who can decrypt it. If there is anybody else who has the key to decrypt the content that you're sending to me, then my content is not secure. If anybody else has that key, if Facebook has that key, if Google has that key, then everybody, oh, I just said it and my phone came to life. So they are listening to us, our devices. But if anybody else has that key, the government will have that key. Hackers will have that key. So if you are using an app like, say, WhatsApp, you're using Facebook said that they wanted to have a new end-to-end encrypted system, and there's a new one called Telegram that's popular. Snapchat, I believe, is supposed to be encrypted end-to-end. The problem is, do you ever recall generating your own key for those apps? You didn't, right? So who has that key? Where is that key? Well, it's on your phone, presumably, or it could be on the server of Snapchat. Hopefully it's on your phone. But even so, if it's on your phone and it's accessible by the app, well, guess what? Snapchat has access to your private key. They can unencrypt anything they want to, which means that if the government really wants to get a warrant, they can come in, they can decrypt these messages. Maybe they can't get messages that are already sent, that have been encrypted, and the key's been through. There are different ways to do that, right? To have security that can't be later decrypted. But for the most part, your devices are not secure. I think people need to realize that. The only way to get true security is, well, just get smarter about how encryption works. If you're going to send emails, use something like Pretty Good Privacy. But right now, most people they don't have the time, they don't have the technology. We are all so vulnerable, and this law makes us even more vulnerable. It's not necessary. It's absolutely ridiculous. I expect it will pass with bipartisan support. There's going to be some Democrats who oppose it. A lot of Democrats who will oppose it. A lot of Republicans who will oppose it. But I think you're going to see more people in each party support this bill, and that's just really unfortunate.
Yeah, it definitely is. I understand some of the intent, but I also think sometimes the stated intent is not necessarily what the real intent is. So
I don't give them that. I don't give them that much credit, and I'll tell you why. When the Patriot Act was first signed into law, those provisions had already been written. They had already been drafted years before. These were things that had been included in other bills at other times, and they weren't able to get them through because Congress said, no, this is wrong. We don't support this. And what happened when there was an emergency? They passed the bill anyway. They used it to pass a bunch of bad ideas into law. And so these are ideas that that William Barr has already had cooking. He already wanted these things to happen. And so they have been thinking, how do we push this law for people's hot button issues? You can't use coronavirus. So, child exploitation, which is terrible. It is a terrible thing that we need to deal with as a society. But I got to say, this is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. This is absolutely the wrong way. We have protections. We have the Fourth Amendment for a reason. It has served us well. There's no reason not to get a warrant. But I don't have a lot of hope, because I think the big problem is going to be not enough voters are going to understand this issue. Not enough voters are going to be motivated by this issue, even if you understand it, even if you think this is a bad idea. Is this the issue that's going to decide your vote? And if it is, whom do you vote for? Because if both Republicans and Democrats support this, you don't have a choice in November. You have the two parties that both support this bad bill that is against your civil liberties. So, not much of a high note to end on, but I'm not optimistic. I'm just
it's bipartisanship. Aren't we supposed to be advocating for bipartisanship? I always think that's silly too, by the way, because I think it's funny because it always seems that, people don't realize how much bipartisanship there actually is, especially on important issues like this. But hey, it's bipartisan. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.